So far, we've looked at several different data types, but we haven't formally addressed length measurements, which can be the most confusing. Let's take a look at each type. So here we have just a basic web page, and I've created a div in the center of the page, and we'll be working with that a little bit later on. Switching over to our text editor, you can see that we just have some basic markup inside of the body tag. We just have a single div, and there's some boilerplate styling. Now, there are two different data types that we're going to talk about here. There are relative lengths and there are absolute lengths. Now, relative lengths scale more easily on multiple devices. So we're going to use a unit called ems, and throughout this video I'm going to be using different units, but they should ultimately translate to the same lengths. So we're just going to go ahead and type in 38 ems here. And ems are most commonly used on fonts to make them scalable across different devices. Basically, ems are the font size of the relevant computed font. So if we go ahead and switch back to Google Chrome here and refresh the page, you can see that our length changed a little bit, but it's about exactly the same as what we had before. Another unit type that is relative are x's. So we'll change this to about 80 x's, and this is much less common. Basically, this is just the x height of the relevant font. So we'll go ahead and switch back and refresh, and you can see that we have about the same as what we had before. That's it for relative lengths, and the rest of this video will be focusing on absolute lengths. We'll go ahead and switch back to our text editor, and we're going to type in 6 inches here. Now, of course, 1 inch is equal to 2.54 centimeters, but we'll talk about how this is calculated a little bit more later on. So we'll go ahead and switch back to our browser and refresh. You can see that's roughly what we had before. We can try out 15 centimeters, which is another unit type. And again, about the same thing. And we'll try 150 millimeters. And that should be exactly the same as 15 centimeters. Now, if you think about these absolute lengths for a second, you'll realize that mapping these measurements to a computer screen is confusing because of pixel density. You could have a large screen with a low resolution, which would have a low pixel density, and conversely, you could have a display like a smartphone, which is typically quite small, but has a high resolution, which would have a very high pixel density. So then, what is an inch, a centimeter, or a millimeter? Do you go by pixel values, or do you go by the size of the screen, or something else? Well, CSS uses what is called an anchor unit, and there are two different types. The first is what is called a physical unit, and this is where the dimensions are anchored using the physical measurements of the device at a DPI or pixel density of 96 pixels per inch. Unfortunately, not all monitors and screens are at 96 DPI, so these units can be difficult to work with. If you'd like to read more about how all this works, I encourage you to check out the W3C documentation on this. The second anchor unit type is called a pixel unit, so let's go ahead and talk about those. So we'll go ahead and switch back to our text editor, and we'll use a unit called points. So we'll change this to 450 points. Now, the points that are used by CSS are equal to 1/72nd of 1 inch. These are also more commonly used for fonts. So let's go ahead and switch back to Google Chrome. And if we refresh the page, you can see that it looks basically the same. And the next unit we're going to take a look at is called a pica. And we'll go ahead and change this to 38 picas, or PC. And 1 PC is equal to about 12 points. And again, using picas is less common, but not unheard of. So we'll go ahead and switch back to Google Chrome and refresh the page. And you can see that we have just about what we had before. And then finally, we'll end up where we started with pixels. So we'll go ahead and change this to 600 pixels. And 1 pixel is equal to about 0.75 points. And of course, pixels are probably the most common measurement that you'll see anywhere. So if we switch back to Google Chrome and refresh, you can see that we have about the same thing. Now finally, we are going to just touch on percentages, which aren't exactly relative or absolute, and they're also not strictly a length measurement. Now, percentages can get pretty complex when you have lots of elements on the page, but fundamentally, they're actually pretty simple. So we'll go ahead and change this to about 40%. And what this is going to do is it's going to just fill 40% of the width that we've allocated for this page. That about wraps things up for length and percentages, but there are still a few more data types to learn about.